Welcome back to my channel.
In this video, we are going to see how to configure interface IP address and how to configure static route and how to configure static default route in Cisco routers. Finally, we will verify the connectivity between different networks. For this demo, I am going to use this topology. Here I am using 4 routers, R1, R2, R3, R4. This R4 is our edge router. This R2 will connect us to the outside network, outside WAN. And this R3 will connect us to DMZ network. There is a server, private server network. This R1 will connect us to inside local area network. Now we will see how to configure routers interface IP address in every router. First, I will go to R1's console, enable, and I'll go to global configuration mode. And first we will configure this network G00 interface G0/0. Now we have to configure the IP address 192.168.1.1 and subnet mask is 255.255.0 and we have to give no shut. Next, I'm going to configure the loopback interfaces for router 1. And before that, I'll do one more thing. I'll name this router as R1. So host name R1. So once again, I will go to interface. Now we will configure loop 0 interface, loopback 0. The IP address is, here we can see the line protocol and interface loopback 0 is state to up. So here we don't need to give no shutdown command because it is already up. The IP address we are going to use 192.168.2.1. It is best practice to use 32-bit subnet mask here for a loopback interface 255.255.255.255. And we will configure the next loopback, interface loopback 1, and the IP address I'll give 3.1. You can refer the topology for our IP address. Now we have configured the IP addresses for all the interfaces, interface G00 and the interface loopback 0 and interface loopback 1. Now we will configure the routes. In this demo, we are going to use static routes. In this static route, we will configure static default route also. For any unknown destination, we have to configure default route. This is inside network. From inside network to reach the outside network, we are going to use the default route from R1. So we are going to configure the static default route from R1. The command is IP route 0.0.0.0. Our destination is unknown, so we are giving 0.0.0. And our next hop IP address is this R4, router R4 G00 IP address. So that is 192.168.1.25. Router for all the interfaces IP addresses will end with 25. So now we have successfully configured the static default route from router 1. And now we will check whether all the configurations are successfully made. So to check the router's interface configurations, I'll use show IP interface brief command. Here we can check All the three interfaces are successfully configured and status also showing it is up. All the IP address also configured successfully. And we will check the routing table for this router 1. I'll use the command show IP route. Here we can see the static default route we have configured 0.0.0.0 via the router 4 IP address. So we have successfully configured static default route in R1. Now I will go to router 2's console. Enable configuration mode. Here I'm going to configure the interface IP address. All the router 2's interface IP addresses will end with .2. Before that, I will configure the router's host name as R2. First, we will configure the interface G00 IP address. So interface G000 IP address 15.1.1.2 255.255.255.0 24-bit subnet mask, no shut. Next, we are going to configure the loopback interface IP addresses. Interface loop 0 IP address 20.1.1.2 255, 255, 255, 255, 32-bit subnet mask for loopback IP address. And next, we will configure another loopback interface loopback 1, and the IP address is 30.1.1.2 255.255.255. Okay, now we have configured all the interface IP address. Now we are going to configure the static routes. So we are going to configure the static routes for this inside network and the loopback interfaces and the DMZ networks. First, we will configure the network of 192.168.1.0 IP route, destination IP address network 192.168.1.0 255, 255, 255.0. The next hub IP address from R2 is R4 G01 interface IP address, that is 15.1.1.25. Next, we are going to configure this loopback networks, R1's loopback network. That is 192.168.2.1. The same next hub IP address, and another network also we are going to configure, that is 3.1. The same next hop IP address, and one more we have to configure, that is the network between router 4 and router 3 DMC network 172.16. .172.16.1.0 255.255.255.0. Now we have successfully configured all interface IP addresses in R2, and we have successfully configured static routes from router 2. We will check the interface configurations using show IP interface brief command. Here we can see all the low plug interfaces and G00 interfaces are configured with IP address, and status also showing us up. And we'll check the routing table using show IP route command. Here we can see all the connected and local routes, including 4 static routes we have configured from our router to DMC network, and this is the inside network and inside loopback interface networks. I'll open the router 3 console now. Enable. I'll go to configuration mode and first I'll configure the host name. I'll give R3 and the IP address we can see from the topology. First we will configure interface G00/0 IP address 172.16.1.3 255.255.255.0 24-bit subnet mask, and we'll give no shut. Now we will configure the static routes from this static default route from the router 3. So from router 3, we have to reach the outside network, or if we want to reach the inside network, we have to use the router 4's G02 interface. So in this case, we will configure static default route. To configure static default route, the command is IP route for any unknown destination 0.0.0.0, and the next hop IP address is this interface G02 IP address 172.16.1.25. Now we have successfully configured the default route from the router 3. Now we will check the interface configurations. Show IP interface brief. The interface is configured with IP address and status is up. And we'll check the routing table. Here we can check our static default route is configured successfully. Go to router 4 console. Enable, and I will go to configuration mode. First, we will configure the interface 0. We will interface G00 IP address. Before that, we will configure the host name. Host name we will give edge_r4, and interface G00 IP address 192.168.1.25 255.255.255.0 24-bit subnet mask, and we have to give no shut. And next we will configure interface G01. Interface G01 IP address 15 dot 15.1.1.25. That is the IP address of interface G01, and we have to give no shut. Next interface, we have to configure the interface G02. Interface G02, and the IP address is 172.16.1.25. Here we can see that 172.16.1.25. All the R4's IP address will end with 25, and we have to give no shut. Now we have successfully configured all the interface IP addresses in Edge router 4. And finally, we have to configure the routes from router 4. So to reach the 192.168.2.1, 3.1, this network, we have to use this router 1's G00 interface as next hop address. So the command is IP route 192.168.2.1, 255, 255. To reach this destination, we have to use 192.168.1.1. That is the next hop IP address. This IP address of R1 G00 interface. The same way we have to configure for another network 3.1. So for that network also we are using the same next hop IP address, and from there to reach the interface loopback IP address of R2, that is the outside network. We are considering it as a outside network. So to reach there, we have to configure one static default route. So IP route unknown destination, any unknown destination. We have to use router 2 G00 IP address as the next hop IP address. So 15.1.1.2. I'll save the configurations. Now we will check the interface IP address configuration. We'll verify that using show IP interface brief. We have successfully configured G00 and G0/1, 2, 3, all the 1, 1, 2, all the three interfaces with IP address, and status also showing up. Now we will check the routing table. Here we can see the static default route we have configured for out to reach the outside network, and we have configured to loopback interface network that is located in router 1. Finally, we will check the connectivity between all the networks. First, I will go to router 1. First, I will ping from the R1's G00 interface, and I'll check the connectivity between router 3's G00 interface. The IP address is 172.16.1.3. So I'll ping 172.16.1.3. It is successfully working. Now I will check the connectivity from R1 to R2's outside network, that is loopback interfaces 20.1.1.2. I will ping 20.1.1.2. Yeah, it is also successfully working. I'll check the another outside network, that is 30.1.1.2. That is also successfully working. Now I'll go to router 2. From router 2, I'll check the connectivity to router 3's G00 interface. That is our private server network, DMZ network. So I'll ping the IP address from here. R3 G00 IP address is 172.16.1.3. It is also working successfully. Now we are having connectivity between one network to another network. So this is how we have to configure interface IP address and static route and static default route in Cisco routers. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel.